we're going to be talking about, and this is a headline from the Salt Lake Tribune, LDS Church's plural marriage cartoon undergoes a big change. Of course, I have an angel with a flaming sword there as a cartoon because, again, this is geared toward children, which is one of our main objections to the entire thing. So when this first came out, the original cartoon, we were trying to remember, I think, November, end of November, beginning of December. Of course, we talked about that as all other podcasters did. And RFM, who I consider a prophet, made this statement on one of our episodes of the newscast. To do hard things.
I predict this will be gone by Christmas.
You know, I keep looking at it every day because I felt like it should have probably been gone the first day that all of those, you know, very prominent podcasters started talking about it. You know, I was a little more hopeful. It should have been gone the first day. So, but I know a lot of us have been checking in on it through the months, and here it is, December, 2 months later, and suddenly it's changed, and that original version that we covered so thoroughly is now something different. So we're going to go through that and just kind of explain the changes. It was picked up in the Salt Lake.
Rebecca,
yes,
the prophet
yes,
would like to
RFM.
speak just for a moment, please. Thank you so much. You know, I think if I were an apologist and I was trying to defend my prophetic mantle, I would say, yeah, I said by Christmas, it didn't happen till February, but I didn't say which Christmas, right? I didn't say Christmas of which year.
Okay.
However, no, I did mean that Christmas actually. And so I would just say, I think maybe in spirit more than letter, they did finally, figure out that this wasn't a good idea. And they've removed a lot of the offensive stuff.
Yep. Although whether or not they would ever acknowledge, that it had something to do with all of us podcasting about it and mentioning the frequency of the word hard over and over, I don't know that they'll ever go there. So anyway, the article in the Tribune is LDS Church changes its polygamy cartoons for children. And of course, this is Peggy Fletcher Stack. Gone are the panels depicting Emma Smith and Brigham Young. And we're going to talk about that. Not only was it changed in some of the wording, but some of the original panels are completely missing from this new version. So the article says why the change, and this is the only semblance of a church statement that I can find about why the change. It says this chapter has been simplified to help the intended audience, specifically children, to understand that plural marriage was practiced for a time by some in the church. Spokeswoman Irene Casso said Thursday in a statement, and was discontinued in 1890. Any comments on this church statement before we go on?
Well, taking it at face value, it does sound like what they're saying is that they want to make it really clear this is not going on now. This was done over a century ago, and it's not coming back.
Yeah, that's it. And also, I think they want to clarify, and we'll get into this as we go into the particular wording, that only some practiced it. This is some. This is a long time ago. This is not happening now. And, because I think a lot of us podcasted about how, especially you, RFM, when you read that amazing blog, do you remember that? Where they talked about how the original cartoons were so destabilizing for children and families.
Yes.
Yeah. That was incredible. I can't remember what it was called now, but it was, anyway, one of our past episodes. So,
and I'll just note one thing, Rebecca, on that previous slide, we've hammered this to death 1,000 other places, but technically the church is trying to always keep the end of polygamy at the very moment that Wilford Woodruff gave the manifesto, but not true, right? It doesn't actually conclude until 1914 or thereabouts.
Yeah.
There's another one in 1906, and then in the 30s. It just becomes something where I'm not sure that there's a date you can say, okay, it's over here at this point. I mean,
right, but it certainly was not 1890 hard stop, because there's no way to do a hard stop on polygamy, and that's actually very tragic in its own right.
Especially when the president of the church continues to take plural wives.
Exactly. Yeah. No, there's a lot of really tragic stories, my ancestors included, where, they had multiple wives, and what do you do? Who do you live with? Who do you toss aside? It's a very tragic era. All right. The article goes on to say that Valerie Hudson, a Latter-day Saint scholar who directs the program on women, peace, and security at Texas A&M University, applauded the move. This revised subtitle is a great step forward, Hudson said, who had argued this exact point about polygamy. She wrote in an email, "This change indicates that polygamy is a time-bound Abrahamic sacrifice, which precludes any idea that polygamy is the normative marital state in the eternities. We're going to talk about this a little bit later with Bill and RFM. The revisions also appear to address concerns voiced about gaining divine blessings from strict obedience to whatever God commands. And that is something that was portrayed. And as we look at the subtitles, you'll see exactly the change that they're trying to make and what they're trying to deflect. So one last statement here. This is somebody who is not as excited about either set of cartoons. It says, this doesn't solve the problem for me, says exponent to blogger Abby Maxwell Hansen in an email. Polygamy is still just as horrible a stain on the history of the LDS Church as it ever was, and I don't think teaching it in a more palatable way somehow makes it any better. She argued that the only way to repair the damage would be to apologize outright for the behavior of early church leaders and to take accountability for having taught polygamy as a fact of heaven to girls and women since the 1800s. Hansen also was frustrated that the church didn't acknowledge making the change because of public outcry. So I tend to be more in her camp. I tend to agree with all of that because, and we'll talk about this maybe more later, but I certainly was told that that was the eternal goal for me and where I would end up in a polygamous situation as a woman in the church. Any thoughts on this before we actually dive into the text of the old and new cartoon?
Yeah, on that first one, what was it on the slide before this? Yes, the Aggie, Valerie Hudson. I appreciate her perspective. I do think that if she thinks that change to the subtitle, right, which is a commandment for a time, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're going to show that next.
Yeah, I think that if she's saying that it suggests all of that's in yellow, that's probably overstating the case of what it's suggesting. Where she says this change indicates that polygamy is a time-bound Abrahamic sacrifice, which precludes any idea that polygamy is the normative marital state in the eternities. Yeah, it didn't come anywhere near talking about that part.
Yeah, I agree. People have their own spin on it and their own take on it. So let's look and see exactly what it says. So we'll first go into the heading and the subheading because those are loaded right there and there are only a few words. So the original heading here, plural marriage, faith to obey a law from the Lord, even when it's hard. And you'll hear that phrase. It's almost a drinking game, right? Over and over in the original cartoon, completely taken out from the second cartoon. It says not easy, things like that. It never says even when it's hard. So to me, I agree with what the exponent woman said, and that is this lets you know that you may be asked to do something someday that your moral compass and your gut tells you don't do. You need to do it. It's a commandment and it's hard and you've got to make yourself do it. And that's a very dangerous path to go down. The new heading has a completely different focus in my mind, and it is plural marriage, a commandment for a time. So again, the emphasis there is was practiced, not practiced now. Don't worry, little kids who are being read this story. This isn't something you will ever have to worry about, the ghost of polygamy. How did you guys interpret the change and what I see is total focus of these subtitles?
Bill?
Yeah, I think that they saw that they are, again, we're not talking about explicit admissions here. It is implicit in the change. And what's implicit is that they recognize that what they were being told is that having children learn that they should go along with really unhealthy things, even when it's hard, they had to get rid of that. So they did. So by making it a commandment for a time, playing on the temporary commandments, by the way, by making it a commandment for a time, they get away from one of the things that they were criticized for with these cartoons, which is pointing out to children that they should obey things like polygamy at all cost. And the heading change, at least in some part, does that.
Yeah, I think that what they've done now, which is better, is they've just made it more historical. Mm-hmm. It's anemic history. It's history for, kids, and that's okay. That's good because what they were doing with it before, and what I think they've taken almost all of it out, is trying to use polygamy as an object lesson to teach children to obey their leaders in the church, regardless of how bad they feel about it.
Right.
Yep. I agree. And they've taken that component completely out for the most part. And it's now just, in my mind, a series of, like you said, bullet points of history, facts. This happened, this happened, this happened. not connected by any kind of concept that they're trying to get through, like the obey your leaders and do it
I
even when
think this
it's
is good,
hard.
but Rebecca, you've talked to me before about the fact that kids are smart. At least you sure were. You were precocious as heck from what you tell me. And yeah, kids can put this together.
Yeah.
They don't need to have all of this other stuff that's been taken out. The story itself tells the story, right?
No, it does. And if they're like me, they're going to read plural marriage and they're going to go to the dictionary, right? I mean, every time I heard something, I was on high alert to understand what things were. And I would go look it up and I would research it. The library, the dictionary, of course, in my pre-internet days. But these kids at their fingertips are going to be able to go to church sources, the Gospel Topics essay on polygamy, and they're going to be able to find a whole heck of a lot more than just this cartoon. So loaded, even here in the change of subheadings. All right. So I've put the former cartoon, it's in black and it's at the top of the screen. And then the new one is in white and it's below. And the text that is in white are the things that are the same. They remain the same in the older cartoon and the new one. The yellow is where they have made a change. And I think that's where we sort of focus, because there's a reason they changed it, right? There's something new they're trying to say. Heaven forbid they would admit it was public outcry. They will not. So the old cartoon in the first panel says, while the prophet Joseph was studying the Bible, he read about prophets like Abraham and Moses who had been married to more than one wife. And this is the same thing it says in the new cartoon. He's reading, he's studying, he says, oh my gosh, more than one wife for Abraham and Moses. Now, the difference is in the next sentence. In the old cartoon, it said, Joseph wondered how the Lord felt about that. So he decided to ask the Lord. Now, to me, that kind of portrays somebody that's a little curious. I wonder what that's about. You know, that's kind of how I take that. I think I'll ask, is this something that could be for me? You could take it that way. It's sort of more of a passive, I'm wondering what this is. Then what they changed it to is Joseph had a lot of questions. Okay. So now that sounds like he could be concerned about it. You know, is this something that I might have to do? Where I sort of read the other one is this something I might have to do? It's kind of all in the delivery. And it says, so he decided to pray and ask the Lord. So subtle difference, but it just kind of conveys to me a different feeling of why he's asking. Did you guys pick up on anything in that change there?
You know, it doesn't seem that significant to me, although they certainly want to make it clear to the children that you only ask God questions through prayer.
Mm-hmm.
That would seem to be obvious, but you know, they have to please everybody on the committee. And I think that even these kind of changes, these look like the kind of changes that got made because they were making changes elsewhere. It's a wonder a committee can ever come up with a final version of anything.
I'd love to know the process of review and everything, given the things that we've seen get through, right? Do you have any thoughts?
By the way, if I were in
go
charge of
ahead.
the project, I would change some things that were not important like this in order to draw attention away from the things that are important and make them all look kind of the same out there.
Yeah, no, that's a valid point right there. Anything you see in this bill?
No, I don't have anything to add to
Okay.
this small change here.
Okay. Yep. It's just a small change. So then we go on and it says, the Lord said, this is the old cartoon. The Lord said that usually a man should marry only one wife, but sometimes the Lord commanded his people to be in marriages of one man and more than one woman. That was called plural marriage. The Lord told Joseph that his people should only be in plural marriages if he commands it. Okay. So that's the old cartoon. The new cartoon starts out the same. The Lord said that usually a man should only have one wife. And here's where they change it. But sometimes the Lord commands, and in this one, it says a man to be married to more than one wife. Now, I noticed that in the old cartoon, they used the word woman several times. Other women, to a woman, like it is here. The new cartoon takes out the word woman. The female they're talking about is already a wife. The role of the wife, the ordained role of a wife. So you never have this idea where somebody might say other women, you know, I mean, people have heard that phrase before, right? It kind of has a dicey connotation. They took the word woman completely out. It's always a wife, already signed, sealed, delivered into this covenant. And that is really the only difference. Then it goes on and says the same thing. So what do you guys think about that one? It's a small change. But to me, the fact that they took out the word woman, and also here they say in the old cartoon, his people to be in marriages. Okay. So that means widespread. In the second one, it says a man should be married. So again, just kind of dialing back the idea that this was prevalent. Any thoughts?
Not I for this one.
Okay.
Yeah, I think this is a relatively small change as well. I think the adaptation makes it more clear what they're trying to say. I think there's more room for misunderstanding in the first one.
Yeah, I think so too. So here's where it goes totally off the rails. And there is nothing in the second cartoon that is the same that was in the first cartoon. So there's a picture of, and the pictures are the same throughout, although we will talk about some of the panels that they left out. So this is Joseph, and he's got his hands over his face, and he's praying fervently. The old cartoon says, a few years later, the Lord told Joseph to marry other women. See, there's the word women, right? Marry other women. Joseph didn't want to marry other wives, but he knew it was a commandment from the Lord. When Joseph asked a woman to marry him, he told her to pray about it. He wanted her to know that the Lord, he wanted her to know from the Lord that it was right. So this is a whole story. This is Joseph praying. This is his interaction with women. You have this idea that he's talking to women saying, God wants you to do this. You need to pray. You need to find out. It's this whole narrative, kind of how he approached people about plural marriage. That's gone from the new cartoon. The new cartoon, instead of a few years later, says years later. Could be years later, right? The Lord told Joseph and some other saints. So right away, it's not just Joseph like it was in the first cartoon. Now it's many others. The church uses that a lot. Like many people do this, or like others. So they're doing this here. The Lord told Joseph and some other saints to be in plural marriages. It was not easy to live this commandment. So it wasn't hard. It wasn't easy. So this is where you really see them. And to me, the more it differentiates from the original, the more they're really trying to get rid of what it said in the original, right? So what do you guys think about this? Totally different wording, verbiage here in the new cartoon.
I'll just say, in the original, there's a sentence there that just can't be defended. Joseph didn't want to marry other wives. So first off, a number of the women weren't women at all. They were children. They were females under the age of 18, as young as 14 years old. It really is hard to figure out how the rational brain can make an argument that Heavenly Father asked Joseph Smith to marry specific children as young as 14 years old, and that when Joseph implemented that practice, that he did so by putting timelines, spiritual penalties, lots of pressure. And then you have to buy into that if Joseph didn't want to do it, why did Joseph pick kids? Well, that's because God told him. And if God told him, that makes very little sense in terms of a God either. So I think they had to get as far away from that sentence in particular. And there are other things about this too, and I'll let RFM comment.
I think this is one of the good examples of taking a lot of things out that are extremely problematic and obviously subject to abuse by evil-minded people.
That's it. The proof is in what's on the cutting room floor, right?
You know what's funny, and it just strikes me? If this language, which actually does describe kind of what happened, the stuff that the way it was originally, was subject to abuse by evil-minded people, am I describing it now, or am I describing it then?
That is the question. But again, the earlier cartoon, in the mind of a child, somebody who's thinking, God tells people to do things that they have to do, they don't want to do. And you're right. If they know anything about it involving children, teenagers might be aware of that. Then, sorry, my dog. Then, God is telling them, Joseph doesn't want to do it. God wants you to marry a teenager. So problematic all around. All right. And then there's a series of panels that they completely leave out. And I call these the bed panels because two of them have Joseph, in this one, Joseph and Emma on a bed wrestling with this question. And my co-host Landon on Mormonish made the point they never show anybody with more than one woman. It's always one man, one woman, and they're talking about this directive from God. So this is completely left out from the new cartoon. It says, this commandment was also hard for Joseph's first wife, Emma. Sometimes Emma helped Joseph decide who he would ask to marry him. Other times, Emma did not want Joseph to marry other women. again, the word women. And I think we can all, I think we're all like-minded on why this had to be taken out. But some people have said it erases Emma from the story and her perspective, which is, horrific and important. So I don't know. What do you guys think about leaving this complete panel out?
I think it's because I got a question for you, Rebecca, and I apologize, but shouldn't it be whom? Sometimes Emma helped Joseph decide whom he should ask to marry him.
Yeah, technically it should.
I think that's why it got stricken.
But it's for children.
Actually, I think they're just trying to streamline this whole thing. I think somebody actually got in there who kind of had a better idea for what would be more appropriate for this age that this is directed at, and get rid of all this stuff. Mm-hmm. Like I say, I would have just omitted it entirely. There's no reason to talk about this. I mean, it's a history book. I get it. This is an important part of church history. I get that. But this is for kids, and they can learn about all these other stories.
Yeah, I'm going to be a broken record because the sentence in there about Emma helped Joseph decide who he should ask to marry him. Who's deciding, God or Joseph? And again, is it God or Joseph who picks the 14-year-old girls out? Because either one is problematic from an ethical standpoint.
Yep, absolutely. And I think if you're a little girl and you're hearing this story, you're thinking, okay, Emma's a mom and I have a mom and dad. Would my mom ever have to do something that Emma did? I mean, you think about that things when you hear stories and you internalize that, and very destabilizing to families, as RFM talked about before. Here's another slide that they left out. Oops, this is one of my favorite ones because all of the brethren are circled around Joseph and they just look so upset. Somebody has drawn their eyebrows on, just so concerned. And Joseph is standing in the middle and he's delivering the worst possible news he could ever give to the apostles. And that news is Joseph taught the 12 apostles about plural marriage. It was a hard commandment for them too. So worst news they could ever get, that they're going to have to take more than one wife. They just don't want to do it. Again, this is left out completely in the new cartoon. Any thoughts?
Well, if it were Mormonism After Dark, I know what I'd be saying. But since it isn't, let me pun it to Bill for a second.
We have quotes in early church history where the top leaders, I think Wilford Woodruff being one of them, Heber C. Kimball being another, make references to not allowing the young men to pick out all the pretty girls, so that some of the pretty girls make their way to Utah so that the leaders can have them.
It's only fair.
How hard of a practice is this for leaders who are very concerned about the physical attractiveness and youth of the girls that they get to marry? I don't know. We like to paint church leaders like they don't want to do this thing. They don't want to do it. They're just doing this hard thing. It's really difficult. And the reality is that the quotes around it, the way high demand fundamentalist religions work around sexuality, the way in which celestial marriage was practiced, the things that they said about it at the time, it's anything but the way the church is trying to paint it today.
Yep, that's exactly right. And that quote is so damning. If you're not familiar with it, it was said to missionaries, written to missionaries out in the field, like, hey, no, you can't marry any of these girls or make promises with them. They got to come back home.
Yeah, Garrett.
We got to check them over.
It's one of these guys sitting around here with the furrowed look on their faces saying, oh my gosh, this is the worst thing I've ever heard in my life.
Yeah. Now, they're actually probably worried about how they're going to go home and tell their wives. I would say that would be legitimate, honestly. So, but completely left out of the new cartoon. And the last one that was completely left out, again, on a bed, one man, one woman kneeling by the bed. This is Brigham Young and his first wife. And it says, Brigham Young and his wife, Mary Ann, prayed a lot to the Lord about what to do. They learned that they should obey the commandment of plural marriage. So similar thing. It's we can do hard things, right? That is the theme of the original cartoon.
And they're praying on the bed.
And they're praying on the bed. That's right. One man, one woman. Yeah. And she looks pretty upset. He looks pretty fervent. Kids look at pictures. They do, when there's the text, but then kids learn a lot from those rogue artists that paint things for us. Is that like a kid's room?
Are those fish on the blanket? Is that what the pattern is? Fish?
I don't know.
No?
I have no idea what's on the bed. I don't want to know. So, all right, completely left out. Now let's go to the next one, which is again a difference in how it's portrayed. The original cartoon said, For many years, some of the saints, only some, were asked to be in plural marriages. People outside the church did not like plural marriage. They made laws against it. Some saints, including church leaders, were put in prison. But the Lord blessed the families who obeyed the commandments, even when it was hard. So, new cartoon, very much abbreviated. Again, sort of a bullet point sense of just, making statements, not a lot of extra commentary. The new cartoon says the government made laws against plural marriage. There it is. And then repeat from the first one, some saints, including church leaders, were put in prison. So the first one lets you know people didn't like it, right? Society didn't like it. This one doesn't say this. This one just says the government made laws. No mention that there were already laws in place. It's just extremely matter of fact. Any thoughts on that one?
I think that's probably about the best you can say about it.
Yeah.
What do you think, Bill?
Same thing. Yeah, I think this is probably again, if they're determined to mention polygamy, and they really have to on some level, right? Part of what people complain about is that the church isn't transparent enough about the problems. And so it comes out the gospel topic essays, which are completely whitewashed, but at least somebody gets an introduction that there is a problem out there. And polygamy, this is their attempt to have kids not grow up into adults who said the church never taught me that.
Right.
And they tried to get away with teaching more of it than they should have. And now they've had to pull it back, but they're still left wanting to teach polygamy. And so, you put lipstick on a pig, it's still a pig. They're trying to make polygamy sound as great as possible, as least of problematic details as they can include. And yet there's no way around it. It's still polygamy, still religious coercion polygamy.
Yep, that's exactly right. So now we're on to our last slide, and it is the very same. The old one and the new one. They say in 1890, the Lord told Wilford Woodruff, the president of the church, that men should not marry more than one wife anymore. The leaders of the church shared this commandment with the saints. This is still the Lord's commandment today. A man should be married to only one wife. And there it is. Case closed. On to the next story. Bedtime
this is still the Lord's commandment today. Is not saying it's never going to change back or it's different in heaven. Going back to what that scholar
Hudson
at A&M, Texas A&M had said.
Valerie Hudson. Yeah.
Yeah. And the subtitle, for a time, right? It's over. It's done. We don't need to be concerned again. And it was funny because I started to research, some of the multiple sources that say, of course, that's not the case. And I thought, you know what, I'll just throw it over to Bill and RFM. And here they put together a really nice presentation, just exactly what we're talking about. A commandment for a time. That is not accurate. So I'll let you guys take that.
All right. So is there anything you want to say about that picture?
No, that was just my final picture to kind of look at what it actually means. I mean, we're talking about a lot of people impacted for generationally and didn't end in 1890. It went on and on.
All right. So the only thing I wanted to make a note of was the change in the subtitle, which we discussed already. Faith to obey a law from the Lord, even when it's hard, to a commandment for a time, a temporary commandment. And the only thing I wanted to note here was that RFM and I did a episode, Think Celestial Marriage Before 1890. And I'll put up here on the screen, every time we do a historical episode, at least almost every time we do a historical episode, I usually go into Reddit and I put all of my sources down and how RFM and I got from the beginning of the episode to the end, demonstrating clearly where the evidence leads you. So this is the Reddit post about that episode. And I'm just going to scroll down and just simply say, the church is trying in the here and now to make an argument that, number one, celestial marriage is not the new and everlasting covenant. It's actually, and then they try to change it so celestial marriage isn't polygamy. It's one man and one woman sealed for all of eternity. But when you go into the data, and there are tons of it, I'm not even a third of the way done through this yet. What you will see if you were to pause the screen and read through all of this stuff or go into Reddit, all you have to do is look up the Reddit post in the Reddit forum ex-Mormon or Mormon, and it's titled Thinking Celestial, Proving Celestial Marriage. What you'll find if you read all the sources is that the early leadership clearly taught that celestial marriage and the new and everlasting covenant are polygamy. And not only are they polygamy, but that Jesus visited John Taylor in 1886 and clearly tells him that polygamy is never going to go away. It is here forever. He can't take it away. And so the church has completely changed on this issue because it wants to get as far away from polygamy as possible. And so the only thing I note there through all of that data is that this was not a temporary commandment. This was a restored doctrine that was supposed to exist until the church no longer existed. And this is just one more line item where the church claimed something in the early history, changed it, and then changed their theology around it so that people who were naive wouldn't ask any further questions.
And then they let the apologists come and bat cleanup for them and explain to everybody why the new and everlasting covenant is not marriage. It's actually everything kind of all put together in a bundle. It's all of it. It's not just, polygamy.
It's a one-stop shop. And I went on ChatGPT to see, I asked the question, is there polygamy in, LDS heaven? And it said no. And it gave a nice little paragraph. But then under that, it said yes. And it gave a nice little paragraph. And then it said there are conflicting opinions on this. So
No, there aren't.
Yeah, I know.
How could there be a conflicting opinion about it? Joseph Smith was married to more than one wife.
I don't know. You haven't talked to any monogamy affirmers lately then.
No, I'm not using that term. That doesn't exist for me.
It's a new term. I just learned it.
Those polygamy deniers, those PDs.
Anyway, that's all I have on that. I think we're done with that.
All right. Is the next one mine?
Can I say one more thing about that?
Please.
Yeah.
It is in Mormonism, if you accept what's told to you by the leaders or the apologists, they will cherry pick something. So for instance, the Book of Mormon says that, unless God commands otherwise, monogamy is the rule. And so the apologist gets to point to that and go, that solves it. Look at that. There's where our theology comes from. You can't ignore the dozen to 24 statements on the record from leaders of the church and their proclamations and revelations and the quotes that come out from them that clearly say something else. And so there's this game that gets played where apologists and leaders get to pretend by cherry picking one thing that was the only thing they had to pick from. And the reality is that Mormonism contradicts itself at every turn, literally every turn.
Yes. And by this point, no matter what position you have, you can find stuff that was said by Mormon authorities to support it.
Yep.